episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome again to another episode of our show with another truly fascinating guest who is helping to create a better tomorrow for so many different people around the world. As a little background, the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development was established by the Vatican, by the Holy Father Pope Francis back in 2016, deals with a range of issues including migrants' rights, refugees, victims of the slave trade and human trafficking, justice and peace, the progress of peoples, the promotion of dignity and human rights, disarmament and armed conflicts, as well as their consequences on civilians and the natural environment. We are honored today to be joined by Cardinal Michael Czerny, who serves as the Undersecretary of the Migrants and Refugee section of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. Cardinal Czerny entered the Society of Jesus back in 1963, was ordained in 1973, and did his graduate studies at the University of Chicago in interdisciplinary programs in humanities, social thought, and theology. Earned his doctorate in 1978, and was ordained a cardinal by the Holy Pope Francis on October 5th of 2019. Cardinal Czerny, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to come on the show today.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you.
It's wonderful to have you. I would love to just start off by giving you the floor for a couple of minutes. If you could just take a couple of minutes to how your background and how you became known as the Cardinal for the Peripheries by Pope Francis, that'd be a great way to start things off.
Well, I could begin by saying that I was born in Czechoslovakia, and a couple of years later, with my younger brother and my parents, we went to Canada. Whether you call the word went, fled, or migrated, but in any case, we escaped to Canada, where I grew up in Montreal, attended Loyola High School there, and afterwards joined the Jesuits in Canada. And I've had a varied career I studied, as you said, at the University of Chicago in the United States, and I've worked in Canada on social justice and Catholic faith issues. Then for a couple of years in El Salvador after the 6 Jesuits and 2 women were assassinated at the University of Central America. And for 11 years, I was the secretary for the social apostolate for the Jesuits, based here in Rome at our curia or headquarters. And then for 8 years, I founded and directed the African Jesuit AIDS Network to help Jesuits throughout Africa in about the 30 countries where we find ourselves to respond to the challenges of AIDS. That was at the beginning of the millennium, the beginning of the century. And then I was called back to Rome as an assistant or counselor to Cardinal Peter Turkson from Ghana. Cardinal Turkson was president of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, which is one of the 4 components which Pope Francis then put together in 2016, as you mentioned, to become the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. Within that Dicastery, there's a section called Migrants and Refugees. There's 2 of us undersecretaries, myself and Father Fabio Baggio as Calabrini Father. And the 2 of us then are responsible for this section. And our mission is to support, encourage, and if necessary, assist the bishops and their cooperators, their collaborators throughout the world in responding to vulnerable people on the move. And by vulnerable people on the move, we mean asylum seekers, refugees, vulnerable migrants, displaced people, internally displaced people, climate displaced people, and victims of human trafficking. You might notice that I use the word vulnerable migrants because migration is a reality throughout our world, and there are many, many people who migrate and don't need any particular help or support, they do so freely. They know how to do it. They do it easily, and their passage is facilitated and made relatively easy, and sometimes very easy. Most of the people that most of us know are people who have moved. Very few people are natives of the place they started off in. And but there is a small. These are the categories I mentioned, and the vulnerable migrants are among them. And so that's our mission now. And even in this sort of brief run through, maybe you've already picked up elements. In effect, how did I end up in this job at this, you might say, late stage of my life, as I'm preparing to enter into the fourth quarter of my century. So the answer maybe starts all the way at the beginning, when I myself and my family were refugees. We were migrating, we were fleeing, and we were looking for a place which we could call home once again. And that's what I'm now busy with as one of the 2 undersecretaries of the Migrant and Refugee section. But I could also say that throughout my life, and especially since I became a Jesuit and finished my studies, that I've always been involved in one way or another with those who are seeking human dignity, security, justice, or in one simple word, hope. What are the conditions for hope? And it's easy for those of us who are a bit more comfortable to think that hope is just a given, because it seems to be part of our way of life. But if you start subtracting the basics on which our life depends, you see that our life becomes so difficult as to become, or to risk becoming hopeless. And once human life is hopeless, well, then human life is undermined, is seriously undermined in body, mind, and spirit. And I think our basic conviction that I'm sure most our listeners share, and so many people throughout the world share, is that human life deserves to be human. Human life should not be lived in a subhuman way, and human dignity should not be sacrificed to for any other interest or advantage or gain or profit. Human dignity is non-negotiable, and unfortunately, it is overlooked, discarded, and traded, and denied and trampled on in many different ways throughout our world. And the gospel of our Lord, the revelation of God is that we, as Pope Francis has been insisting recently, we are brothers and sisters. And so the dignity of each and every one of our fellow inhabitants is central to our concern and central to our living out our faith. And so that's, I guess, what my life is busy with, and maybe answers your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I appreciate that introduction. And, you know, when you took on this position in terms of the migrants and refugee section, you mentioned that obviously this is one of the most important, urgent phenomena of our time. I had the opportunity to serve on a group with, at the time, Ambassador Jose Gomez Camacho. At the time, he was Mexico's ambassador to the United Nations, who had helped put together the United Nations compact on making migration safe, orderly, regular, in a proper way. And the numbers, as you were saying, were staggering, even when we look beyond sort of the 700 or so internal migrants, just the amount of people that are forcibly displaced. Can you just talk a little bit about the church's role in dealing with, I mean, it's such a large number, but even sort of the subset of these forcibly displaced migrants is amazing. Talk a little bit about the church's role and the different areas that you focus on in terms of orderly and safe migration.
Very good. Well, I too was involved in the great effort that the ambassador was co-leading.
Yep.
And so I'm happy that you mentioned it, because unfortunately people don't know much about the compact for migration, and it's an important framework for international cooperation. But to answer your question, I would say maybe one of the most important things the church does is to question your way of posing the question. In other words, you kind of framed your question in terms of huge numbers. And what the church does is to not focus on huge numbers, but to focus on persons and families and communities. And if you focus on persons, families, and communities, instead of getting bent out of shape and discouraged by large numbers, which is the effect that these have on us, instead of that, you seize the opportunity and you try to meet the needs of this person, this family, or this community. And that's what, in fact, the church does. The church doesn't deal with statistics, and the church doesn't deal with people in masses. So the responses of the church to the needs of vulnerable people on the move, if I can use that expression to sum up all the different categories that we're talking about, the church's response has been very well summed up by Pope Francis, not so much as a description as a challenge, and it's a challenge which he puts to the church, but to everybody. What are the elements? What are the necessary elements of anyone's response to a vulnerable person, a vulnerable family on the move or on the run? And the answer is, our response has to consist of welcoming them, protecting them, promoting them, and integrating them. And at first they might just sound like a string of words, but if you take the time to meditate a bit on the 4 words, you will see that these are a very complete prescription or outline of the dimensions and even the phases of what vulnerable people on the move really do need. And I think the most, well, they're all interesting. Each word has its but the first one is very interesting because when you think about it, welcome is essential for any truly human relationship. If you start off with something that is not welcome, you're not going to get to anything positive in a human relationship. You cannot positively relate to someone by saying, I don't really want you here. I don't want you to be part of my life. I don't recognize that you exist. I don't think that you really have dignity. You aren't welcome here and you're not wanted here. Once we've said that, and we sometimes say it in words, but we usually say it with structures and processes. Once you've said that, then everything else is cut off and in fact killed. So welcome is so very essential. And I think Pope Francis has pushed on this word of welcome in promoting human fraternity, as he has been doing most intensively this past year. But welcome is very important. And for those of our listeners who might be unfamiliar with the area of human mobility, of vulnerable people on the move, but with other areas of human need, other kinds of vulnerability, other groups of people who tend to be excluded or marginalized or neglected or ignored or persecuted or suppressed, whatever category you might be interested in or you might have experience of, you might see that your positive response, your human response, and indeed your Christian or other religious response, indeed does consist of welcoming them, protecting them, promoting them, and integrating them. And I won't go through the categories. It's up to each one to think it through. But I think you'll say that is a pretty good summary of what we are invited, called, and challenged to do in response to every one of our brothers and sisters. And as soon as you find out yourself saying, well, yes, but not those, well, that's your new challenge then. Your new challenge is to say, well, no, there aren't those others who don't deserve my welcome, protection, promotion, and integration. So it's a, yes, it's a particular field responding to, or a particular focus responding to the needs of certain people, certain communities, certain populations. But it's also a translation of the Great Commandment. It's a translation of Christian, Jewish, Muslim faith. It's a translation of all the faiths, really, in how we are challenged and called to treat one another.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Dicastery's involvement with the environment. I recently listened to a talk you gave on an encyclical of Pope Francis entitled Laudato Si, focusing on our relationship, the relationship between nature and society that lives within it. And then, one of the things I noticed, obviously, aside from sort of the ecological issues talked about, a component of that, the rights of indigenous peoples, which very interestingly, I happen to have a member of the Waorani Amerindian tribe that recently won this huge court case against, I think it was the Ecuadorian government and stopping logging and protecting the Amazon rainforest from timber companies. Could you talk a little bit just about sort of the focus of the Dicastery in terms of the environment? And then obviously you've been very active also in the South American, sort of the indigenous peoples. Could you talk a little bit about sort of from that aspect as well? I think that's a very interesting subtopic.
Well, good. Sure, I'm happy to do that. In fact, in the comments that I've been making so far, I've been maybe spelling out some of the aspects of human fraternity that Pope Francis has highlighted in his latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. We are all brothers and sisters, and so you could say that he is highlighting that we are all interconnected. But in 2015, he published the encyclical you mentioned, Laudato Si. And there he emphasized and said that everything is interconnected. In other words, which is a formula for what we mean by environment. In other words, that when you look at things environmentally, you pay attention to the interconnections, the interdependencies, the effects of one phenomenon on another, and that's when you add that all up. That's what we call environment. And Laudato Si calls our environment our common home. Our common home. It could also, to underline the urgency, it could also call it our only home. Our only home. Despite a bit of science fiction, we really don't have the option of moving somewhere else. Right. We are, this is where either we're human here or we're not going to be human at all. And so Laudato Si brought into focus our involvement in, our interconnection with, and our enormous responsibility for the environment, our common home. And again, along the lines of what I was saying earlier about our brothers and sisters, also when it comes to our common home, we are not free to sacrifice our home for some short-term gain, some short-term advantage, some short-term profit. We have to take care of it in a long-term way. So one of the interesting things that Pope Francis did, one of the many interesting things that Pope Francis did in Laudato Si was to include future generations of people in our responsibility. that when we think of, for example, the golden rule or other expressions of our interconnectedness and our responsibility for one another, that is not only right now. In other words, what we usually think of as social justice, our responsibility to one another.
Sure.
But our responsibility extends to future generations who will look back and say, well, now, weren't they a fine lot in the early 21st century, where they knew, but they didn't do. They knew, but they didn't do. What a sad judgment that will be. And what a sad thing for people, let's say, who are looking forward to the birth of their grandchildren now, to be able to look those children in the eye and say, you're very welcome, we're so happy you were born, but unfortunately, the world we're leaving for you is uninhabitable. It's uninhabitable because we really needed this product, we really needed this profit, we really needed this advantage. We couldn't manage without it. So sorry, no water, no fresh air, no wood, no agriculture, no fishing. Sorry, isn't that sad? But that's how we're behaving. That's how we're behaving. So that's Laudato Si helped us to rediscover or discover for many of us for the first time that what we call the world or the planet or other cool expressions for it is actually something very close to us. When you say my home, our home, you're saying something that's really loaded and really important for you. And we have one home for all of us. That's how God chose to give us life in one home. He could have put each one of us on a separate planet. There were plenty of planets to go around, but no, he put us all together on one planet and said, this is your home, take care of it. And we said, thank you very much, but we're not taking care of it. So that's not very bright. And so now I've lost the thread of your question. So what am I supposed to say to you about this?
I was just looking at the Dicastery's involvement, and then also I was mentioning sort of the indigenous peoples component of the Dicastery, because I knew you were actively involved in the sort of South American and indigenous peoples activity there as well. So I was just looking to.
Well, that actually was a very focused time.
Right.
A year and a half, 2 years ago, when when the Holy Father named me one of the secretaries of the Synod on the Amazon.
Yep.
And yes, in the years leading up to that, I was involved and very interested. And in Laudato Si and in earlier and other addresses that the Holy Father gave, he has been emphasizing how we can't take care of some of a human heritage or treasure like the Amazon in a kind of a cold and technocratic way. We have to take care of it in a holistic way, which is to say that the people who live there are part of the environment, just as the environment is part of them. And it is sheer madness and folly for us who are not living in an area like the Amazon to think that we know best and that we should be free to cut it down and pave it over because that's the way we see it. When the people who live there have, you might say, over the generations and centuries have grown up in the environment and are not only deeply connected with it, but are wisely connected with it and do know how to care for it in ways that we sort of super industrialized moderns can't even imagine anymore. So the idea that caring for the Amazon or caring for the Congo Basin or caring for the Pacific Islands is is to be seen in terms of technical or economic problems and solutions is very, very short-sighted.
Sure.
Whereas the people who live in the territory need to be at the table. They need to be at the table, and not just as silent witnesses to the decisions made by others, but as active participants in the decision making. And that would help us to meet our responsibilities to our common home. I think that the scientists have made it very clear that if we throw away the Amazon as we're doing now,
yep.
Our common home will probably collapse. I hope we're not so stupid as to see what that's going to be like. Although I know that some people are tempted to do that, and it looks like the decisions of the better off and the more powerful still go in that direction. That the resources, the extraction of the resources, is more important than the evident danger that is posing to not only to the Amazon and to the people who live there, but to all of us. This kind of interconnectedness, interdependence, and the willingness to slow down, to consume less, to enjoy more, to relax a bit, and to stop the mad rush towards wealth and consumption. That's a prospect which collectively we seem to, at least those in the higher positions, seem to be denying or avoiding. Although there is some progress, and there are themes of that we've talked about already in this interview, which are making their slow way into public thinking and public policy. So I don't want to paint too apocalyptic a picture, but I do think it's important to underline the urgency of going further and faster in the decisions which will assure not only the survival but the flourishing of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon and really throughout the world. It's the ways in which they have been suppressed and set aside is all to the damage of our common home and our common family, our human family. So those trends really have to be reversed. And then other important decisions about how we live and how we consume, especially in the over-consuming nations, because some of us live way beyond our budget, our planetary budget. And most of the poor live way under it, but we, people like you and me and most of our listeners, we live way over budget, and we can't go on doing that.
Cardinal Czerny, 20 years ago, in the midst of another major pandemic, HIV/AIDS, you founded the African Jesuit AIDS Network, and you directed that for 8 years. Here we are in 2021, another pandemic, different type of one, but still there are many components that are quite similar in terms of where it's disproportionately affecting people and so forth. Any interesting learnings? I mean, thinking back 20 years now to AJAN, can you just talk a little bit about some of your thoughts as we are in the middle of another pandemic 2 decades later?
Well, I could begin by saying that AJAN stands for African Jesuit AIDS Network, and so that was the name of the effort that I was leading up to network, to bring together in communication and coordination the Jesuits scattered throughout 30 different countries in sub-Saharan Africa who were in one way or another engaged in HIV/AIDS ministry. And I guess you've invited me to kind of apply the learnings and the model of AJAN in the current situation. And I think maybe that's a valid question and an interesting suggestion, because what I've said now, that people are engaged in an effort in various places, in different locations, in different territories, therefore with different people. They don't need to be regimented. They don't need to be fed a single solution or obliged to follow a single protocol, but rather they need to be accompanied and assisted to respond to the needs of the people who they are seeking to serve, seeking to help. And maybe that pattern, which favors the local qualities of a response, the response to the particular needs, or the way in which the needs show themselves in each place and situation. Maybe that's an important feature where what we often mean by globalization means uniformization. It means reducing the differences so that a single product will be bought and sold throughout the planet, and we will consume that simultaneously in an identical fashion in order to enhance the profit margin and make sure that the corporation, because it's usually few corporations, if only one, that the corporation prospers. That model of globalization is perhaps coming to the end of its useful shelf life. Maybe we need to find ways to enhance the local dimension or the local foundation of our responses. So we're responding to needs which we can identify and which are quite similar, but what we need to do is not export and distribute single answers, but encourage responses. And this might be true even in the case now of this terrible pandemic of COVID-19. We're very grateful for what science and technology and medicine have so quickly discovered about it, so that we could be well informed, so that responses could be intelligent throughout the planet as this thing spread practically instantly to every corner of the globe. At the same time, we need to enhance local and national public healthcare systems. I think that the pandemic is not only revealing the weakness of the human body, that we are unprotected, defenseless in the face of this tiny enemy, but also that our public health systems nearly everywhere are not up to the task. The public health dimension, which is essential in dealing with a pandemic, has been decimated and cut down in favor of privatized medicine and medicine on the business model. And this is very short-sighted. Again, short-term profit, but long-term damage. So we need to learn how to care for ourselves, to care for one another, also medically or health-wise, in a coordinated way, in a way that doesn't depend on the profit motive, but depends rather on the care motive. And the profit motive is a fine thing, but it needs to serve the care motive, not replace it. And unfortunately, when medicine is mercantilized or rendered, whatever you call it, by a private enterprise, that's privatization. That is short-term profit and long-term misery, long-term short-sightedness, long-term incapacity. And what I think what we've seen in nearly every corner of the globe is the incapacity of the public healthcare system to respond. And where there are exceptions, we have seen it's because thanks to public healthcare. There are countries which have responded very effectively and denominator. So again, lessons to be learned about how we care for one another. So we've shifted from caring for the common home now back to caring for one another, which is finally the theme of Fratelli Tutti, the latest encyclical. And in fact, just last week, we celebrated the first International Day of Human Fraternity on the 4th of February. And there we try to remind one another all over the world, thanks to the love of God, as however we express our relationship with God or in the different religions and faiths throughout the world, but that in our, thanks to God's love, God's care, God's providence, we are brothers and sisters to each other. And thanks to this event, and thanks to the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, we had this international day to remember that we are brothers and sisters, and to kind of reinforce our willingness and our creativity, our energy, our focus in how we can more effectively, more truly treat one another as brothers and sisters. And the interesting thing now, which is verified also by you and I having an interview separated by thousands of kilometers, is that there really is no limit to what you or I or anyone means by brother or sister. In other words, that word extends to this line, and here's the frontier, and beyond that frontier, they are not brothers and sisters to me. That's the message that Pope Francis has communicated so effectively. And you would say, well, we always knew that. I don't think that's true. We didn't always know that. We implicitly or unconsciously put borders. Borders give us a false sense of security. And so we put borders and say, these are my brothers and sisters, or these are my friends, or this is my tribe, and the others are, and then you have whatever names you want to use. And that's not true. It's not true. So let's recalibrate and rethink and redo what it means to live in this common home with our brothers and sisters. So if you wanted in a slogan, a sort of a concluding slogan, that Laudato Si taught us that everything is connected. Mm-hmm. And Fratelli Tutti taught us that everyone is connected. Mm-hmm. So everyone is connected in our common home, and in which everything is connected. So those are the connections, and that's what our faith brings us to recognize and to respond to responsibly and generously.
Outstanding. Czerny, one final question. Obviously, we were just talking. You were just mentioning, obviously, what technology has substituted for nowadays, especially over the last year. Could you say just a few words while I have you about the Crisis and Health Rosary component of the Pope's Worldwide Prayer Network? Because technology is giving us so many things. It's giving us now new ways to pray and pray for others. Talk, if you would, a couple minutes just about this, if you would.
Well, sure, I'm glad to. So what was at the origins of the Worldwide Network is what we used to call the Apostleship of Prayer, which was a work that was entrusted to the Jesuits, to the Society of Jesus for many years, many centuries. But during the time of Pope Francis now, this Apostleship of Prayer has been transformed into the Pope's Prayer Network in order to involve people everywhere in ways which are now possible through the electronic networking that we have, so that we can indeed pray together, more or less simultaneously, or on a 24-hour basis. There's somebody praying all over the world, somewhere around the world for the Pope's. And so the monthly intention, which was a tradition within the Apostleship of Prayer, is now an intention which we can share all over the world through electronics, as well as through other publication means, and which is enhanced each month by a video, a short video in which the Holy Father proposes his theme and invites us through images and sound, music, and a few words to begin our prayer, to begin our meditation on that theme. And in fact, in January, the theme was on universal fraternity, and so it was a wonderful preparation for the first International Day of Human Fraternity. This month of February, we are praying for forgiveness and recovery from violence against women. And each month, the theme calls us to an important part of our life together in society and on the planet. So again, our common fraternity, that we are brothers and sisters in our common home. And there's an old slogan which is very true: the family which prays together stays together. And the Holy Father's prayer network is the human family praying together, and that's and praying together in our one common home. So that is a contemporary expression of the basic truth that as a human family, if we pray together, and those who participate in the Pope's prayer network are, in a sense, doing you might say, work of prayer for everyone, carrying the prayer intentions forward in their prayers wherever they are. So it's a very appropriate topic that you chose with which to close our conversation, because it in a way it allows us to see that there are ways of expressing with faith and hope that the many different points that we've touched upon, and to do so in response to the Holy Father's invitation each month, depending on the theme, and to do it together thanks to the coordination of the network and thanks to also the electronic means that are at our disposal. So let's indeed be a human family that prays together, so that we can also stay together in this common home.
Thank you very much for that message. Cardinal Czerny, it was an honor spending time with you. For everybody that's going to be watching this episode on the YouTube channel or listening on the podcast network, you've been listening to Cardinal Michael Czerny, Undersecretary of Migrants and Refugee Section from the Dicastery of Promoting Integral Human Development at the Vatican. Cardinal Czerny, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. And as we say on the show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people out there that need a better tomorrow. It's been an honor seeing you.
Thank you. God bless you. And yes, God bless everyone who's listening and watching too.
Thank you so much.